Hello everyone, today I will be presenting a project that explores fragmentation as a way of constructing spatial experience. A fragment is an idea in presentation. This is a deceptively simple formulation, and its simplicity is its philosophical precision. The fragment in my reading is not a material piece of something larger, not a remainder, and not an incomplete unit awaiting reassembly. It is something far more specific and far more consequential. It is the act through which an idea becomes present, not represented, not approximated, and not pointed toward from a distance. It is presented, given form, made perceptible, and brought into existence as something that can be encountered. This distinction between representation and presentation is philosophically decisive. Representation implies an original that the representation refers back to, a complete idea that exists somewhere prior to its expression, of which the fragment offers only a partial image. Presentation, however, implies something altogether different. The idea does not exist fully formed behind the fragment, waiting to be reproduced. It occurs in the act of presentation. The fragment is not a vehicle for the idea. It is the event of the idea's appearance. What follows from this is that the fragment is not incomplete in any deficient sense. It is complete as a conceptual event, a moment in which thought crystallizes into a specific finite form and becomes legible. The fragment does not attempt to exhaust the idea. It does not need to. Its philosophical task is not totalization but illumination, to allow one facet of thought to emerge with full intensity, without dilution, without the compromise that comes from forcing an idea into a system larger than what it requires. This is also why plurality becomes necessary, because no single fragment can exhaust the idea it presents. Thought requires many fragments, each a distinct act of presentation, each revealing what the others cannot, each irreplaceable in the constellation that they all form together. Each fragment establishes its own spatial presence, and fragments relate through orientation, spacing, and proximity. The whole emerges through these relationships, making the system open and dynamic. The way is the following. The fragment is not where an idea is stored. It is where an idea happens. Presentation is not the container of thought, it is thought becoming real. The idea does not precede the fragment, it arrives through it. This analysis leads us to our first model, Plot 20, where I began exploring fragmentation as a spatial system through a series of physical configurations. The model tests how autonomous fragments interact through orientation, spacing, and movement rather than forming a unified whole. This facade drawing represents the system as a field of fragments rather than a unified elevation. There is no dominant hierarchy. Each element maintains its autonomy, and the composition is read through alignment, spacing, and directional forces. It shows how fragmentation can still produce coherence without forming a single unified mass. This diagram captures the moment where multiple spatial forces converge into a single point of collision. The impact produces a rupture, forcing displacement and redefining the relationship between these fragments. The project is not about stability, but about controlled instability, where space is continuously negotiated through force. Following the rupture, a directional force emerges and penetrates the existing structure. This intervention is not additive but acts as a precise incision that reorganizes the space from within. As the intervention progresses, fragments begin to align and suggest a potential whole. However, this condition remains unstable as the unity is temporary and continuously negotiated. Each fragment detaches from the whole and operates as a complete spatial condition. Their autonomy allows them to exist independently without relying on a unified system. Despite their independence, the fragments establish relationships through proximity, tension, and alignment. The project ultimately exists as a field of interactions rather than a fixed whole. The project shifts from a singular moment of collision into a continuous spatial negotiation between independent fragments. The stop motion, which you will see now, reveals how the spatial condition does not exist from the beginning, but emerges progressively through the positioning and collision of fragments. Each step introduces new relationships, from separation to alignment to tension and then finally to rupture. Now we move to another assignment where we visited our site and had to write a paragraph describing the site visit and enhancing it with ChatGPT. A main point I focused on in my visit to the site was how disappointing it was to enter the Radio de Liban building, although it appears breathtaking from the outside, even though the studios were still well preserved. ChatGPT took this and developed it into a very important question. Can architecture still hold value if it fails to support lived experience? If meaning emerges through encounter, then a space that suppresses perception begins to lose its architectural agency. In contrast, the garden and studios operate differently. They offer clarity, calmness, and a stronger connection to the body. This contrast revealed that the site is not a continuous whole but a series of fragmented conditions. This photomontage is a conceptual reconstruction of the site based on my phenomenological reading. It does not aim to represent the site realistically, but to express how it is experienced. I focused on fragmentation, interruption, and unstable continuity. The composition translates these conditions into a visual spatial scenario. The montage represents a fragmented spatial condition. A strong axis guides movement but is interrupted by rupture. Suspended fragments create tension between grounded and detached elements, and void separates elements and prevents unity. This reflects the instability experienced on the site. Now we ask ourselves, what does the site reveal, conceal, frame, or obstruct when encountered directly, before interpretation stabilizes into certainty? The site reveals itself as a fragmented and unstable. It appears as an illusion of escape within a dense urban context. Noise and urban pressure disrupt continuity, and memory and identity are present but inconsistent. This leads us to our analysis of the site, which studies environmental and spatial conditions of the site. It includes climate, movement, sound, and program. Each layer reveals a different form of fragmentation, and together they build a deeper understanding of the site. The first diagram studies how light moves across the site. It identifies areas of exposure and shadow light conditions influence how spaces are perceived and used. The climate diagram combines wind, rain, and temperature data. It shows how environmental forces shape the site, and these conditions inform how the intervention, which we will talk about later, responds to context. This mapping shows elevation changes across the site. It reveals subtle shifts in ground conditions, and these shifts affect movement and spatial relationships. Sound acts as an invisible layer, shaping experience. Some areas are calm while others are dominated by noise. This reinforces the fragmented perception of the site. The site is composed of different programmatic conditions. These include abandoned residential and institutional spaces. These functions do not connect smoothly, creating fragmentation. Moving on, traffic creates zones of pressure and movement. Some areas are highly active while others are isolated, and this affects accessibility and perception. The following diagram showcases my intervention on site. Due to the traffic and climate conditions, I decided to place my DJ booth directly attached to the Radio de Liban building on Spears Street. My bus stop is on Dunon Street in front of Arida building, and the place where my artist will perform their concert is in the middle of Sanaya Garden. This is specifically due to the low level of noise pollution inside the garden. This section explores movement through the site before my interventions. I propose a fragmented DJ dwelling attached to Radio Liban. The project organizes space through relationships rather than enclosure. Each fragment acts as a complete spatial condition, and movement creates a sequence of experiences. Fragmentation here becomes a tool for spatial richness. My project proposes a fragmented urban system connecting Radio de Liban, Sanaya Garden, and Dunon Street into one ecological and environmental network. A DJ booth, which acts as a dwelling and production studio, is attached parasitically to Radio de Liban, leveraging existing studio infrastructure instead of creating new systems. This intervention integrates bird nesting points, enabling coexistence between cultural production and urban ecology. The birds here will reintroduce natural rhythms such as sound, movement, and seasonality. A performance stage in Sanaya Garden benefits from a calmer acoustic environment, allowing sound to travel more effectively. Here, solar integrated fragments generate energy to power lighting and performances, turning the park into an active, energy producing cultural space. A bus stop will be placed on Dunon Street near Arida building. It is placed in a lower traffic area to encourage waiting, interaction, and comfort. Fragmented planes at the bus stop act as rainwater collectors, channeling water into small basins, bird drinking points, plant irrigation systems, and passive cooling features. Moreover, the bus stop will host mini bee habitats, which will further support the ecological environment. The three sites function as an interconnected system where water, energy, and ecological processes circulate across locations. This phase is very important. It develops the architectural proposal into the DJ booth. It translates the hypothesis into a spatial system, and the focus is on how fragments operate together. These views from my model show the project from different perspectives. They highlight the spatial relationships between the fragments. This diagram focuses on the spatial relationships between fragments, showing how adjacency, overlap, and thresholds create a network of interactions rather than a continuous space. The fragments are placed in proximity to generate moments of spatial tensions, while overlaps and alignments establish the connection between these elements. The gaps between fragments act as thresholds that mediate transition and define spatial boundaries. Through this, the space is understood as a system of interacting conditions where meaning emerges from the relationships between the fragments. This directly links back to my hypothesis, where fragmentation is used not as separation, but as a strategy to generate relationships and spatial differentiation. The booth acts as a distinct architectural condition. It maintains its identity while interacting with the site. It is both independent and connected. And here we have a diagram showing the room separation in the DJ booth. We have the sleep, the eat, the make, and the rest. And another diagram which showcases the bird perches and the large display screen which will have multiple uses. Human scale is used to understand spatial proportions. It helps visualize how the user interacts with fragments, and it reinforces the experiential quality of the project. The DJ booth attaches lightly to Radio Touliban. It uses a plug-in strategy rather than heavy intervention. This preserves the existing structure while adding new layers. The structure is supported by an independent frame. It clips onto the facade without damaging it. It allows access from both inside and outside, and it extends the function of the building outward. It also enhances the environment. This slide shows the initial construction process of the balsa stick presentation. It focuses on assembling fragments as independent elements, and the process reflects the conceptual approach. And this is the final model after development. The relationship between fragments becomes clearer, and the system becomes more controlled and precise. And finally, this is the final outcome of my project. It represents the full translation of the hypothesis. Fragmentation here is expressed through spatial relationships and experience. This final photo montage shows how the project sits in the real context. It highlights interaction between architecture, nature, and movement. It reinforces the idea of fragmentation within the urban fabric. Thank you.